Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Christ, Culture, and Coffee. I am your host, Robbie Lashua, and I'm here with my co-host, Tyler Hurley.
Hey, what is going on, you guys? We're super excited to get into this topic with you today. We've covered this before a little bit in past episodes, but we wanted to really dive in depth with this. So we are going to be covering worldview, right? What is a worldview?
We actually were called out on it a little bit, not in a bad way, but there's this listener on Instagram, and he's like, hey, I've been listening to all your episodes, and you guys said you were going to do a thing on worldview, and I can't find it anywhere. And so I went scrolling through all of our episodes, and I was like, I can't find it anywhere either. And so
we swore that we did this.
We both thought we've done this before, but I guess we haven't done an extensive thing on it. So today we're going to talk about what is worldview, and then over the next few weeks we're going to get into different worldviews, and we're going to assess them based on what we talk about today. But before we do that, as in every episode, if you are an old listener, you know this, but if you're a new listener, we start every episode with a coffee tip, Christ, Culture, and Coffee. And so today's coffee tip is brought to you by Mr. Tyler Hurley.
Thank you for that introduction. So for this coffee tip today, it is very interesting. It's a little, I don't know, it makes sense when you really think about it, but the tip for you guys is to buy coffee beans in small batches.
Small batches.
Yes. No, meaning don't go to like Costco or Sam's Club or some big super like industrial marketplace and buy a bulk bag of coffee beans.
But dude, they have them on sale there. It's like you can get 100 pounds for like 99 cents.
You can. Something crazy like that. If that was real, I might actually buy it.
Yeah, that might be an over-exaggeration.
I would care to a certain degree as long as it's not Folgers. I would drink as much of it, But the thing is it is definitely a better way to get your coffee by buying it in smaller batches because the roast is fresher, right?
Yes.
So imagine this. Say you buy like one of those big bags.
Yeah, they're huge. I've seen them.
It's all roasted at the same time.
Yep.
So you bring it home. It lasts you like a couple months, maybe. Depending on
how much you drink.
Yeah, depending on how much you drink. I don't know. It depends. But the thing is what'll end up happening is over time, the date that those beans were roasted continues to age. So therefore, it is no longer fresh. So you're not getting the best coffee beans for your money if you are buying them in bulk, which is always why we want to buy it in smaller quantities, so that way you can have a fresher roast. That's the same reason why, if you think about it, why we've recommended in the past that you grind your own beans. You don't buy it pre-ground because it's not as fresh, right? You want it if you want it to taste the best, you want it to be as fresh as possible. This is one of the ways to do that. Buy it smaller and don't buy it in bulk.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, man.
Yeah.
I like that idea. It's just so tempting sometimes. Buying certain things in bulk's not a big deal, like toilet paper or whatever. But coffee, there is a shelf life to the freshness. It won't necessarily go bad.
No.
But it won't
be
taste
as
as good.
Yeah.
So if you want a good cup of coffee, the fresher the roast, the better. The closer to the time you're consuming it that they were roasted, the better. That's why if you can find the ones that even have it written on there, like roasted on this date.
Yeah, they do that a lot.
Oh, that's the best. Yeah, because then I'm within a few weeks of it being roasted, and that's the prime.
Oh, yeah. That's
nice.
Exactly it.
I like that coffee tip. And I shop at Costco, so this is helpful.
I do too. Yeah. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. All right. Well, let's move into the subject for today. So we're going to talk about worldview. And this is an interesting word because so many people use it, and honestly, within Christianity, it was kind of a big buzzword for a long time. Worldview. I remember there were contemporary Christian songs about it. So let's talk about what it is, and then we're going to get into how we can assess what a good worldview is. So first of all, when we're talking about defining it, there are kind of two key aspects to a good worldview. The first is that it is a person's perception of reality, and then the second aspect of it is that it's the basis for their decisions. So that's kind of a generalized idea of it. It's how they perceive things to be and the basis for their decisions.
Yeah.
What they believe and how they act in regular life. It's a pretty simple concept.
Exactly. It makes total sense. And then also what we like to break it down to with as well is that a worldview question deals with three aspects of one's existence.
Yes.
And that's what we're going to talk about too. It's going to be, the three aspects are God, which is a concept of ultimate reality, because not all of those worldviews say that there is a God.
Yep, that's your perception of reality,
Your
right?
perception.
Who's God?
Correct.
Yeah.
Your perception. And then number 2 is humans, right? Meaning human existence, self-consciousness. Where do we come from? What's our purpose? Things like that. Well, actually, purpose goes more into the next one. That is nature, the purpose and existence of the world around me, both physically and spiritually, right?
Yep.
So, again, now all of every worldview falls into these categories, right? But the thing is, it's a matter of how they perceive it. Yep. So that's what we're going to focus on, is what people assume and believe about these questions forms their worldview.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Because what people assume and believe about God, humans, and nature are how they perceive reality and the basis for their decisions. See how that works?
Yeah.
And so
any belief system does this.
And and it doesn't matter if you don't believe there's a God. It doesn't matter if you believe Shiva's a God. It doesn't matter if you believe Allah's the God.
You have a view of what is your deity.
The ultimate deity, even if it's not a deity, if it's just nature.
Right.
And so when we come down to assessing it and trying to figure out which worldview is correct, right, we want to ask which one adequately explains things, because they can't all be right. They could all be wrong, but they can't all be right because they contradict each other.
Right, exactly.
So which one actually represents reality? Which one explains the universe? Which one explains the human condition? And that's what we want to look into with this question.
Yes.
So when we look into it, this is an important concept. I don't think just for Christians, but I think for everybody. When we look into this issue, we got to keep in mind that we're not pursuing the worldview that suits us. We're pursuing the worldview that adequately suits the world. We're looking for the one that's actually out there, not what we prefer.
Right, meaning what actually is, what's objective.
Yes.
What is just the truth.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what your worldview should be founded around.
That is exactly it. That's what we are trying to get to. What is actually out there, not what are my preferences for what I'd like it to be.
Yeah.
And this is hard because we all have preferences. And we all have presuppositions that we come to the table with. But we've got to get beyond that to say, no, I'm just going to objectively look at this, and I'm going to adhere to what the real one is, no matter what it is. So a really good, succinct description of a worldview that I like comes from James Sire. He wrote a really great book. We'll have it in the show notes, The Universe Next Door. It is just a fantastic book on worldview, and then he assesses different worldviews through it. So highly recommend you get it. It's in the 5th edition now, or maybe 6th edition now. It's phenomenal. You've got to read it. So go to the show notes, click on the link, go buy that book by James Sire. But in The Universe Next Door, James Sire describes a worldview like this. A worldview is a commitment, a fundamental orientation of the heart that can be expressed as a story or in a set of presuppositions, assumptions which may be true, partially true, or entirely false, that we hold consciously or subconsciously, consistently or inconsistently, about the basic constitutions of reality, and that provides the foundation on which we live and move and have our being. And so I like when he says fundamental orientations of the heart that we daily assume. And he says consciously sometimes, unconsciously, right? Subconsciously. Yeah. We assume these things. So it's fun to think about, Tyler, like what are some things that we or subconsciously assume about the reality of the world, in particular about ourselves? What are some things you don't even have to think about, you just assume are true and you act upon when you go out into the world?
Well, let's see. I think a lot of times I make up perceptions of my nature. Oftentimes, I tend to forget that I struggle with sin on a daily basis, and I get into my mindset of thinking, "Hey, I'm going to go out and live a perfect life today," right?
Yeah, and you forget about this sin issue.
Yeah, and it's like I know that internally that I'm sinning daily and I make mistakes, but there's days subconsciously where I think, "Hey, I'm doing great," God sees me well in His eyes. That's one thing, at least for me, that I've done.
And you just go out. I think that's so true.
Yeah.
One of the things I think that we all assume is true, but we don't ever think about is that we can think. We just
I think
do
therefore
it.
I am, right?
Yeah, exactly. But we just do it every day. I can't remember a day I got up and I thought, I have the ability to think. I'm just doing it.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you know what I mean?
It's something that happens subconsciously and it's just occurring. Or
Yeah.
maybe even something physical like, like breathing. We don't really think about it.
Yeah,
It just happens.
it just happens, and
Yeah.
we're assuming these things. We also assume things like our thoughts can be trusted,
Right? There's that.
that's a funny thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I think my thoughts are trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
We also believe that there's stuff out there.
Yeah.
Like
of course.
the material world exists, right? Like we assume these things. We assume that we exist, that immaterial things exist, like love.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's weird. So when you start to think about, okay, yeah, how do we categorize all this stuff? And what's the big picture for all of this stuff? And how can we explain the big picture of why all these things are working and what we believe about what's going on? That is what a worldview is.
Mm-hmm. There we go. And that's exactly it. That's the thing. We need to think of it as like something that is perceived maybe subconsciously, just like you said.
Yeah,
that's a big factor of it,
and that's
too,
what he says, though.
as well as
Subconsciously, consciously, consistently, inconsistently, beliefs we have and hold, assumptions we have and hold about the world.
Exactly. And next we want to talk about a little bit how this is formed, right? And one way that this is formed is through culture. That's a big way.
There's an interplay with worldview and culture. They're not the same thing.
Right.
But they do interplay together.
They do, of course they do. And the thing is culture is essentially the social environment that a group of people were raised in, right?
Yes.
Typically, a group of people will adopt a certain behavioral pattern that become normative for the group. And that's what happens with culture, right? And you see that in social media, too. You see it in just maybe even like your old high school friend group, right?
Oh, yeah.
You all have your own culture based off of the people you hang around with. It's human nature.
And you had a specific culture probably with your junior high group.
Of course.
And then you had a specific culture with your high school group. Like things you talk about, things you dress like.
And then a different culture with your family versus and that's just how it is. It's human nature to develop these.
And then we have at large American culture. But you'd have to even say within that there's different cultures, right? There's like the West Coast culture, which I think Arizona is kind of a part of. Right. And then there's like Southern culture, which is very different.
Yeah.
And like even like with respect and with hospitality, it's very different than West Coast culture, which is like laid back, surfer, relaxed.
Yeah,
and then there's like New England culture, which in my mind seems like rude and mean and loud.
Yeah, right.
But maybe to them we seem passive and weak and quiet. I don't know.
And that's exactly it. And culture develops people in that way. It develops you by behavioral patterns that are passed on through generations. They go on, whether it's through your kids or through just a new generation of people being run up in a school or through a country, state. Like it just happens. It spreads. It's human nature, and that's how we develop worldview. It's one of the ways that it's influenced.
Well, so let's talk about that. So how are culture and worldview related?
Yes.
How do they relate to one another?
Yes, exactly.
Because they're not exactly the same thing.
You're correct, yeah. And so culture and worldview are related in that the visible aspects of a culture are to some extent the reflection of an underlying worldview already.
Yes.
So that's the thing. So the culture can already assume a worldview. Like example, you brought up the example of like your friends back in junior high, maybe.
Yeah.
Back then, like junior highers do a lot of stupid stuff. It's what happens.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what age you're living at. It's just unilateral.
Yeah,
across
it's
the board,
just true.
Junior
It's
hires,
across the board.
Yep.
But the thing is oftentimes they all share the same foundational worldview going into it together. And so that worldview influences how they interact with each other and the decisions they make and the culture that's developed in that group.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that's the distinction there, right?
Yeah.
It's the distinction that it is not culture and worldview are two separate things. They are a culture is a result of a worldview oftentimes, or a collective.
Because culture a lot of times becomes the acting out or the behavior of an assumed worldview.
Yeah,
that's what it becomes.
That's a great way of putting
it.
Yes.
So let's talk about like in junior high and high school. For me, and I don't know about for you, but one of the things that was happening a lot at that age with my friends was sex.
Sure.
And because hormones are going crazy, so you've got like a biological factor, right? You're feeling certain ways. You've also got influence from pop culture, But that's also a reflection of an assumed worldview.
Yeah, it is.
But then you've also got education that was teaching everybody that you're just an evolved animal.
Yeah, yeah.
So now that's a worldview that is undergirding a group of pubescent teenagers who are now feeling certain biological things towards one another, watching movies that say it's okay to do that because we're assuming we're just animals anyway.
Yeah.
So sexual promiscuity is not really a problem in that worldview because it's survival of the fittest. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
But I'm over here with the Christian worldview, assuming that sex has a purpose, like we've talked about for the last few weeks.
Yeah.
And that it's not okay to sleep around in junior high and high school because you should wait until marriage. And the reason I held those beliefs and I had those action points in my life is because I had a presumed worldview.
Yeah, that's right.
But they were opposing worldviews that led to different behaviors based on the beliefs.
Yeah, and that is culture, right?
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's a blend oftentimes of worldviews. It's not like always going to be everybody involved is the same. And in fact, that's just not how it is.
No, it's
Most
not.
of the time, everybody has a different worldview.
Well,
That's
see,
how it
that's
is.
what's so hard, Tyler, about when you get to like laws and, passing legislation is because we're dealing down here with the play out of culture. When people are wanting these laws passed based on beliefs they hold from their presumed worldviews.
Yes.
That's the issue. And so it's funny to me sometimes where we squabble down here about what's good for people when the real problem comes down to we don't even believe human beings are the same type of thing as each other.
Yeah.
So it's like we almost need to take a step back to say, how should we go about making laws for this type of thing that's called a human being? But if we don't even have the same definition of what a human being is,
then that's going to
how does
cause
that work?
Yeah.
So it's funny to me sometimes when people think, oh, just through education and through laws, we can get things better. And it's like, well, it depends on which worldview wins out in the laws or which worldview wins out in the education.
Yeah,
does that
really
make sense?
does.
And if it's a false one, then it's going to be harmful to people because now we are enforcing people to live not in the real world.
Yeah. And
so we need to think through that's why worldview is so important, right? Because it really does bring a lot with it. And so, like even last month or this month, right?
Yeah, right.
I'm trying to think. It's still June today to me, but when this podcast comes out, it'll be July.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, that's right.
I had to think for a second too. I'm like, no, it's this month, but
so
it
now
won't
it's
be.
July to all you listeners and viewers out there.
So last month
was Pride Month, June, right? What is this cultural phenomenon reflecting? What worldview is it reflecting? You see?
Yeah.
And so these are the interesting things that we want to help our listeners to think about is what is my worldview, a biblical worldview, and then what is being reflected in my culture and what are the assumptions they're making about the world that are culminating in these movements or in these legislations or in these fads or whatever.
Oh yeah.
That's the idea there. So one of the ways you can get to know what the worldview of your culture is by listening to common slogans that you hear a lot, because these are reflections of the deeper held beliefs of your culture. And so I think about there's tons of them right in our society, or tons that we've seen before, right? It's my life, YOLO, love is love. You can't judge me. Who's to say that I'm wrong? What are other ones? It's okay as long as I'm not hurting anybody else. That's a moral statement, right?
Yes,
that I can do anything I want to do. Nothing's right or wrong unless I hurt someone because I believe hurting people's right or wrong. Well, where do they get that idea from, right? So what we believe does translate into how we live our lives. And a good way to spot what your culture believes on the worldview level is to listen to the common slogans or justifications for their actions.
Yeah.
Because that betrays what they believe.
Yeah.
So one of the things that betrays what we believe is we talk about the image of God a lot.
Yeah.
That as a human being, we're made in God's image. That's a huge deal from a biblical worldview, and it informs how we should live our lives.
Yeah. And well, that's actually it. That's kind of, I like what you said just a second ago as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, right?
I agree with you that you like what I said.
Yeah, there
No,
we go.
just kidding.
But that's the thing. Like people, like there's these slogans that you mentioned, right? That come out all the time. Like you said it yourself, like you can't judge me. Who's to say what's right is wrong? It's okay as long as I'm not hurting anyone else. Things like that.
Yeah.
And the reason why that is significant right now today and how that's impacting the culture is because we live in an informational age, right? It's a culture of information constantly being spread. And this happened a lot through the technological advancements in social media and through instant messaging.
Even going back a little, because for sure, like
absolutely.
that blew it out of the water.
Further,
But even going back to the Gutenberg press and making books available to people at an affordable rate. I mean, so seriously, for the last, 500 years, we have been living in this crazy onslaught of information overload.
You're absolutely right. And it just keeps advancing over time with information being accessible. And so the reason that this is significant and how it impacts the culture is because these messages that we just talked about are being thrown around. They're easily accessed and they're in your face. And oftentimes, all these competing worldviews are clashing with each other because of this constant battle of information. That it's even driving to a point in today's culture, especially, that they demand your allegiance to these ideas. And I say demand because it's true. It's not, hey, this is optional. We're just sharing this as open information. No, you need to understand it. And we're going to force you to go through training on this. And you need to comply. That's what it is.
Tolerating us to have our opinion isn't enough anymore.
Exactly.
Like you said, complying with us and agreeing and accepting our worldview as the truth is what's necessary. And so what's the worldview behind that?
That's the thing. Right? You can always trickle it down by asking those types of questions, right? And that's what it is ultimately. But still, how can we sift through all this information to find out what's true, right?
That's what we want, because there's so much information out there. Who do you believe? How do you believe what's right? How can you even know
there's just
really
so
true?
Much going on. And so the thing is we have to admit, though, through this process that as men who are attempting to explain our existence, it is man's attempt, and we need to reach to someone outside of our situation to help us to understand what is actual reality, or in other words, the real worldview, right? The objective worldview.
Well, and so and this shouldn't be a shock to any of us. When you're trying to learn anything, you want a guide or a teacher.
Of course.
If you're wise, right? You might just try to figure everything out on your own and fail. But if you can be taught from somebody who knows what they're talking about, that's all. We'd all agree that's always better. So it's not crazy to think we probably need help in understanding what's really real. But then the question becomes, who's the best guide?
That's exactly it. That is the question that it becomes with people's worldview. And so, but from our standpoint, we would say, like, having the Christian worldview, and Christianity would say that if the Bible, right, is God's word, then that is something that is an outside perspective on reality and what we can be reading to obtain information. Because that's the thing you mentioned earlier, right? We get information from so many areas, and one of those is books. And the Bible is a book where you can get this information. And if it is actually the Word of God, then it provides an outside perspective on worldview.
Well, see, I think that's a really important point, Tyler. Because if we're just groping around in the dark trying to figure out from inside this system what the system's doing, we're not in the best location to figure it out. We can figure out some things for sure, but it would be much better to have the person who created the system, who's outside of the system, informing us about the system.
And that makes total sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And so, like, that's where you look at Christianity, you look at Islam, you look at Judaism, Buddhism, in a little ways, is those claim to have somebody who is outside of the system telling us about it. And that always seems to me to be a better option. Now, they all could be lying. But that concept seems better than just us on the inside trying to figure it out.
You're not just making this all up on your own.
Having help from the outside makes most sense to me. So I would say those are probably the most viable of worldviews. Because they claim to have this assistance to what's real from the outside.
Exactly. And so that's what we need to realize too. A Christian, this is something that's interesting, is a Christian worldview is at its deepest level a system of truth claims or assertions about reality, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's something that we can learn from about the objective.
Yeah.
And that's what we're looking for. That's what we talked about at the beginning of this. It's the focus should be when it comes to figuring out your worldview, what is objective, what is true. And Christianity can offer that.
And Christianity is not about make your own truth. Go to the inside and find peace in your truth.
Yeah.
Christianity makes statements about the outside world saying this is how it is. So you have things like John 14:6, when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That is a truth statement. That's a truth claim. That is an objective truth claim, an exclusive truth claim.
Yeah.
That there's no other way to God than through Jesus. So the Christian worldview claims to be objectively true. Not if you believe it, it's true for you. It's claiming to be true for all people, whether they believe it or not. Just like gravity, just like the sun being the center of the solar system, right? It doesn't matter what you believe; it's objectively true. And so Christianity really is claiming to be truth with a capital T. The truth, not just an idea, but Christians say we have what's reality for all people. But to be honest with you, any good worldview is saying the same thing. Even if it's relativism, right? Even if they're saying your truth is true for you, my truth is true for me, they believe that concept is true for everybody.
They do.
So there's every worldview believes theirs is the correct one. And Christians a lot of times get flack for that, thinking you're so closed-minded, you're so exclusive. When people are saying that to you, they're pushing on you that their opinion is the truth.
Or their worldview is that everybody should be open to everybody being right.
Yeah.
Even in the relativistic view, which that in itself is a worldview demanding that everyone lines up with.
Yes.
In their mindset, that's how it is.
And so they're basically saying, you're wrong because you don't agree with my view.
Yes.
Which is the same thing we're saying to them. You're wrong because you don't agree with my view.
You are absolutely right. And that's the thing that we have to realize. I think people think that is a negative. That's why, like in the culture, especially, that's a culture thing. They think it's a negative to say that you disagree with someone and you think they're wrong because they don't agree with your view. Yep. That's like, that's a sin in today's culture. That is something that you can't do. But that's not true. That's okay. You just have to be civil and respectful about it. That's what I think should happen.
Yes.
But we can be civil and respectful about these disagreements. But we need to talk about our disagreements. We need to talk about these things and say, hey, look, like we disagree. But the thing is like, we also need to hear what we each have to say and communicate a little about it.
Yes.
I think that's a part of it, yeah.
And if we're truth seekers, if that's what everyone's doing. Because so often, I mean, it's really easy to surround yourself with people who already agree with you, so it's just an echo chamber.
And most people do that, and it's human nature, yeah.
That's even how Facebook's set up, right? It reinforces your ideas that you already have. So we shouldn't do that. We should be truth seekers. No matter if you're a Christian or a Buddhist or whatever, like you should be a truth seeker and hear what others have to say and then assess their claims based on kind of what we're going to go through about the worldview questions. And so we've talked about what a worldview is, how it impacts culture, how do we assess it? And we have, again, this isn't from us, this is from James Sire. In his book, The Universe Next Door, he's developed these 7 basic questions that everybody answers. Everybody has to answer these and understand what they think about them in order to operate in the real world. And so, Tyler, let's go through what are these 7 basic questions? Because, again, this is going to kind of be the template going forward for the next few weeks when we're assessing different worldviews.
Yeah, exactly. So the 7 basic questions are, what is ultimate reality?
Okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, like what is like God for us, right?
Yeah.
We, from the Christian perspective, would believe that God is the ultimate reality. So that's what is the divine? What is the ultimate of everything? What is the end? You know, like what does that mean? What is the ultimate of everything?
And that's where you get even into, more distinctions because Muslims also believe that God is the ultimate reality.
That's true.
Now we're talking about, okay, but who is this God?
Right, and that's where it breaks
down. Now you're defining things. Yep.
So that's the question. What is ultimate reality?
Question number 1, And everything will flow from that.
Yes, it will. That's exactly right. So then the second one is, what is external reality? And already you can see how that can flow from the first one, right?
Well, what does it mean, external reality?
Yeah, what is everything outside of us? Like what is real? What is basically just what is the really real? What is
Okay.
objective? What is actually out there? Like if I go outside, am I in the Matrix, or am I like
Sure.
looking at, real trees and grass outside? That's
So what is nature?
What is
What is
nature?
the universe?
What is the universe?
But you're right though. It's not only that.
You're correct. That's not
Because it's also what are spiritual realities?
Absolutely.
What are emotions? What are so it's everything that's not ultimate reality.
Yeah.
Basically, right?
That's pretty much it. What else falls into the real? Yeah.
Yep.
Other than the ultimate reality. And then the third is, what is a human being, right? And
That's a big question.
This one everybody has to answer, because the
Who
thing
am
is,
I?
Yeah, well, you are a human being, and you have to have an answer to what you are exactly, what that is.
Yep.
And so,
and that even gets into stuff like purpose and importance and dignity, and I mean all of that kind of stuff. I mean, am I an image bearer of God, or am I an evolved animal?
yeah.
That's a very different belief system, right? And your actions are going to be different depending on what you believe in that.
Yes, of course.
Am I an image bearer of God, or am I just part of the oneness of the one of the universe, and I need to get rid of my individuality to absorb back into the one of nothing?
Yeah, exactly.
You're really going to live differently, man, depending on what you believe about yourself.
Yes. And that's exactly it. And so that's kind of just getting into this idea again, like how do you assess your worldview? And who am I is a big part of that. Then question number 4 is, what happens to a person at death? Okay?
That's huge.
So what happens when you die, right? Do you have a soul, like in Christianity, like a soul that goes to heaven or hell, or do you just rot in the ground, right?
Yep.
That's the thing.
And see, it's crazy because that question depends on, well, what is a human being? Am I just an evolved biological machine? Am I just a wet machine?
Yeah.
That has no immaterial aspect? Or is there an immaterial supernatural aspects to external reality? Now we're back to question number 2.
Yeah, that's back to it.
And so it's so crazy how interlinked they are. But yeah, you're right. And then, okay, what I am or where I'm going after I die really depends on what type of thing I am.
Exactly. Yeah.
So they're all interrelated, but these are huge questions that we have to answer.
Exactly. And then the next question to get into is, why is it possible to know anything, right? That's the question that you got to answer. Why is it possible to know objective?
Why do you trust your thinking? Number one, we all assume that we can.
Yeah.
But why do we think we can trust our thinking? That's a really important question and it needs to be answered.
Yeah.
But then the second question that is baffling is, why do I think that what's going on in my brain correlates with what's actually happening out in external reality?
Yeah, exactly.
That's such a crazy thing.
Yeah.
So was my brain made to function with what's out there, or is it just an illusion and I'm tricking myself?
Yeah.
Are you even here, Tyler?
Am I like in a straitjacket in some asylum right now, and this is all in my head? Who knows, right?
Exactly, yeah.
That's the thing.
How do you know?
How do you know? That's what that question comes to answer.
That's a really important one. And how do you trust your thoughts, and what's your reasoning for that?
Yes, and again, these all build on each other a bit. So like the following one is also kind of with that. How do we know right and wrong? That's the next question, right? For question number 6, how do we know right and wrong?
Yeah, so now morality, right?
Yeah, like, is there a morality? Because some people say there is no right and wrong, which that's your view on what is right and wrong, that there is none.
Yep.
Or you have a very defined view of what is right and wrong. You're black and white, or maybe you're just you don't follow a moral code, but then internally you have these weird little things that you're sensitive about, like that. There's people out there that are like that. So like it's another aspect of your worldview is, how do you define or know what is right and wrong?
Yeah, well, and what's crazy about it is because it's not even just about like defining intellectual concepts or lists of actions that are bad. It's more than that, because it's getting at the question, why do you feel guilty when you do certain things?
Yeah.
Well, do we have an inner sense of, I shouldn't do that? I think we've all experienced that.
Yeah.
Where I shouldn't do that. Well, where does that come from?
That's
a
great question.
The Christian worldview says God has created us with a conscience, and that's what it operates to. It alerts us to morality.
Exactly.
The atheistic worldview would say that there isn't really right or wrong, and we can do whatever we want. So a conscience in that view would be something that needs to be evolved past. right?
Yeah,
I mean, so
it would be.
it is
Yeah.
interesting. So how do we know what's right and wrong? Can we say there's objective right and wrong? Because we've all felt like we've been wronged at certain times.
Exactly. That is very true.
And that's the interesting part of it. So yeah, question number 6 on morality. How do we know what's right or wrong?
Yes, exactly. And then question number 7, this is the final one on the worldview.
And this is interesting because this is always such a weird one.
It is,
Every time I
yeah.
go through this, I'm like, this is so bizarre, but it makes sense when you think about it.
Yes. The question number 7 is, what is the meaning of human history? Right, Robbie?
Yes.
What is the meaning of human history?
Yeah, now this gets down to our collective purpose as a species. Is it going in a direction? Is there some trajectory for our existence?
Yeah.
Or are we just here and nobody cares and there's no purpose? Right?
Right.
And then if you get down to if there is a purpose, what is that purpose?
Exactly. Yeah. What is the purpose based off of the past, right? Like,
Yep.
where do we... and it kind of, again, all of these questions kind of like coincide with each other. This
Sure,
is what
of
develops
course.
the worldview. So it's like, yeah, like what is the meaning of human history, right? Like if you have an answer to all the other worldview questions, that also affects how you're going to answer the meaning of human history.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
think about it. So getting back to my junior high analogy about everyone having sex because they were taught they were animals, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you get down to this, if there isn't a God that I can interact with. So now what am I? Am I a spiritual and physical being, or am I just a physical being? Right? And if there isn't this God who cares, and morality is whatever I want to make it, then the purpose of human history becomes I make myself as happy as I can right now doing whatever I want to do. Because when I'm 90 years old, I'm going to die and I just become worm food.
Yeah.
And I don't exist after that. So I might as well live for the moment, do the most I can now, because I'm going to die and there's nothing after that. I think Paul said something like that. Eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we die. Didn't he say that?
He did say that.
That would be the purpose of humanity in an atheistic worldview. Make the most of what you want to do now because your days are numbered.
Exactly.
But if there's an eternity of Christianity's view, then what we do now counts forever.
Yeah.
And we have eternal purpose. If Christianity is true, then sharing the gospel with people is really important because there is a eternal destination to be had after death. If Hinduism or Buddhism is true, right, then we're becoming nothing with the nothing.
Yeah,
we're becoming
exactly.
one with the one of the nothing.
Yes.
And that's the purpose of you, to become less of an individual and to get absorbed into the oneness of nirvana. And it's just, okay, so what we believe about, like you said, the first 6 questions informs us on what is our purpose collectively.
Yes, exactly.
So now let's talk about this. Okay, so I know that we've thrown a lot of facts at you guys and a lot of, here's this, 1, 2, 3 of this, and 7 of these. And so you take the 7 basic questions, because every worldview does answer these. They do. You have to. These are things people think about and have to account for. So every worldview has an answer to these. So when you want to evaluate a worldview, we think a good technique is to answer the questions according to what the worldview says, and then you can assess the worldview to see if it is good. Now, in order to do that, there are 3 things that you need to do to determine if it's a good worldview.
Yes.
If it's false or if it's true, if it's meaningful or if it's meaningless. And these 3 criteria for evaluating a worldview are really helpful.
Yes, and now I'm going to start off with the first one of these. We're going to break each of them down for you. But the first one is that a worldview should have logic base, right? And a worldview needs to be logical. That's the first characteristic.
Yes.
So I'm going to read a quote by Brett Cunningham. This says, "A system whose propositions manually reinforce each other and all parts function together, it should have no internal contradictions. It should not blur concepts or be disjointed. Component parts should create a big picture."
It has to be logical.
It has to be logical.
Yes.
Exactly.
Within itself. That's all we're saying right now. Within the 7 questions, do these things actually go together or do they contradict? So, like if
let's do an
if question number 1 is there is no God that exists, everything's just nature.
Right, sure.
So ultimate reality is just the natural world. And then question number 4, what happens to a human at death? We go to heaven to be with God. Wait a second, you said there is no God. So how do we die and go to heaven to be with God? That's a contradiction.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
a worldview like that wouldn't be logical.
Yeah, of
because
course.
it's contradicting itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And nobody believes something like that. But
Right.
that's just an example of
That's
here's
an extreme
how
example of what it would be like. Yeah.
look. Yeah.
It has to be logical.
Yep.
Yeah, an example of a contradiction would be in the belief that knowledge can only be believed if it's scientific, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is self-contradictory because this belief cannot be proved through science.
Yeah, when people say, I believe, in Nacho Libre, right?
Oh yeah, he's
says,
like, why are you always judging me because I only believe in science?
I only believe in science, yeah. And it's funny because we've talked about this so many times on the show.
We have, yeah.
But science is a good tool for the material world.
Yeah.
But our thoughts aren't material things.
Science is knowledge applied.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And then knowledge can be obtained from the result, but science is the process of going through that.
Yeah, and the problem is the methodology of science isn't something you can test based on science.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a philosophy. So
It
the
is.
scientific method is something that is logical, that is thought up in the minds of people.
Yeah.
And then it's enacted in the real world, and it's not testable, repeatable, all those types of things.
Right, yeah.
But it's true, but it's not based on science. And so when people say, I only believe things based on science, well, that's not true because what you just said isn't based on science.
Yeah, that's
You see the
absolutely
problem?
true.
And so that would be a contradiction.
It is. Another way to spot contradictions or inconsistencies is when two different answers to the seven question, cannot work together, right? Such as many atheists in Hollywood who've been pushing the idea of moral relativism, like we've been talking, right?
Yeah, that there's no morals. You can sleep with whoever you want.
Yeah.
Because you're just an evolved ape.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. But they are now outraged by sexual misconduct things that are happening, right? The Me Too movement. That's happening a lot. So there's a contradiction there because they're saying, well, look, like they're arguing on one end, everything is relative. There's like moral relativism is a thing. It's all subjective.
Yeah,
But
you
then-
can sleep with whoever you want. Free love.
Yes.
Love is love. We're gonna make movies about
That's
this.
the other thing. I gotta touch base to that.
Yeah.
It's also the fact that Hollywood and celebrity status, like just culture, that culture in general, is pushing this open sexuality thing.
And that's based on a worldview that they have.
Correct.
Yeah.
And by pushing that, it's also creating a problem in further sexual misconduct because it's also like they're opening the door to saying anything can happen as long as you are happy, basically. Like it's moral relativism, but it's causing problems. So it's contradictory. And then they get outraged when they say that it is a problem.
Yeah,
right?
like the Me Too movement blows
Yeah.
my mind. And this is a couple years old now, right?
Sure.
But there were all these women who were coming out saying that they were sexually abused or asked for sexual favors in order to get different roles in Hollywood, right? And Harvey Weinstein, was that the guy's name?
Yeah.
He went to jail, right? Because it came out as Kevin Spacey was sexually abusing all these
Yeah.
people. And so it was like people in power abusing their authority to get sexual favors from people, and then they would give them better positions, money, roles, whatever. And when it happened, people were outraged about it. And this is what I thought about it, to be honest. I thought, I always assumed this is what was happening in Hollywood the whole time.
Didn't
because
everyone?
They make movies about this
I'm
kind
just
of stuff.
look, we're not saying this is right. This is disgusting.
It's not right.
It's horrible.
But the Me Too movement
Yeah.
is from a Christian worldview perspective. Like the idea that women should be respected and treated worthy and not be seen as sexual objects and not be pressured into these sexual situations, that's a Christian worldview thing because of what human beings are.
Yeah.
And because of how human beings are supposed to operate sexually. But I don't understand how Hollywood, kind of from a relativistic or atheistic worldview, gets off in being really upset and having the Me Too movement happen.
Yeah.
Because from their worldview, they don't have a leg to stand on with that. And so you ask, well, which is it, guys? Do you want to say, okay, we live in a real world that God made and his morals are what we should follow because people get really hurt when we don't? Or is it just a free-for-all and then you can't complain about it?
Right, yeah. And that's the thing. They have to come to terms with that. It's an inconsistency. So
I just don't
it's
think
not
people
logical.
see that.
You're absolutely
And you
right.
know why, Tyler? It's because they actually do live in the world God created with a conscience that God created in them. And so, just like Romans says, deep down they know that God exists and it's true.
Yeah.
But they suppress it. And so you can suppress it for a time, but then it rears its ugly head because you're the one wronged. And then you want justice because you have a conscience. And so it's funny to me because you try to point these contradictions out to people, and sometimes they don't get it. But it's because they're living in God's world as a image bearer of his, but they believe they're living in this fantasy world.
Yes,
and
they choose to make exceptions.
Confusing.
That's the thing. They choose to compromise on certain things that they know to be true in order to defend a worldview. And that's what happens a lot. And so that's what we're saying. It is illogical to have a worldview that way.
Yeah, and,
so
and one of the things is, one of the ways to assess a worldview is, number one, it has to be logical.
Yes.
It has to be logically consistent and coherent within itself. The second thing that you can use to assess a worldview, the second criteria, is that it needs to be factual.
Yes.
Okay? So it needs to be factual. So a system that is a good worldview accurately reflects what's real.
Yeah.
You can verify it with the stuff that's out there. It corresponds to the real world. That is the big idea. And the other thing is, it should be able to handle all of the questions of life, all of the different data, all of the different things we encounter.
Yes, of course.
A good worldview should be able to take everything into account. So if a worldview does not account for a certain aspect of reality, then it's not a good worldview.
Yeah, and that's true.
So somebody, if it, like the beginning of the universe, where did that come from? Well, a good worldview needs to be able to answer that. What is the universe out there?
Yeah.
What's the problem inside of human beings where we have like good and evil warring within us? What is that? Like, a good worldview has to take into account all of these things, and it has to be factual. So we have to be able to test it with the real world. So you could have a logical system that works within itself that's not factual with the real world.
Yeah, of course.
So,
that's absolutely
and I'm not
true.
trying to pick on people, but Calvinism is a logical system in theology, but it's not factual with the real world or with Scripture.
I would agree with that.
And I just pissed a whole bunch of people off.
That's
okay.
That's okay
Because you didn't pay for this. This is free.
Yeah,
it's free. And you don't have to send us a tip or anything.
That's okay.
But does that make sense? And again, aside from that, we all believe that about certain things. There are logical systems that aren't factual in the real world. Like a Calvinist would say, my view is logical, but it's not factual.
We'll go with that too.
And that's fine.
That is okay.
So assessing a worldview, you can't just look at it being logically coherent with itself. It needs to be that. But secondly, it has to be factual. It has to match up with the real world. And then, Tyler, what is the third criteria?
Excuse me. Yes, the third criteria kind of applies with both of these things, right? It has to be livable. Okay. And that's the thing. You can't live something out without it being logical and factual.
Yeah, and you can't live something out if it's not what's really going on.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where these coincide with each other. It has to be logical, factual, but it has to be livable. So I'm going to break that down. A system that is personally satisfying, well-ordered, and able to be expressed, it should be livable.
Yep.
Right? An example of this not working would be the Hinduistic belief of Maya, right?
Yeah, Maya. So basically, when it comes to the second of the 7 basic questions, the second question is, what is external reality?
Yes.
What is the universe? And the Hindus believe that the external universe is, they call it Maya, which means
it's
what?
An illusion.
It's all an illusion.
It's all an illusion.
This table's not here.
Yeah, we are.
My body's not here.
Exactly.
This cup's not here, right? Okay.
And you have to get out of that. That's the idea. It's like you don't want to. Yeah.
So they believe that the physical world is an illusion.
Absolutely.
So why is this not livable, Tyler?
Well, it's not livable because the real world is real, and the fact that they are coming at it from a basis of illusion, you have to ask them, why do you think that, right? Like, you break that down for them, because the thing is, you realize it's inconsistent, because for something to be livable, for them to go out and say that they have to get out of it, then what is it for them to be getting out of, right? Like, they're claiming that there is some form of reality, but there's That's the thing. It's inconsistent, right?
It is inconsistent, but that goes back to being logical.
Correct.
So this is illogical, I think. But how is it not livable?
Right.
How can't you believe that the world is an illusion?
Exactly. Let me give you an example. I'm glad you brought it this direction.
Yeah.
You can't go up to a bank teller and tell them, hey, I want to withdraw $300,000. If you don't have $300,000
the catch.
in your account. There you go.
Could if you had a lot of money.
You like
Yeah,
the hesitation I had there. You're like, well, if you had the money. But that's the thing. There are certain things in reality, like money, like time, like people that you interact with, just things going on in the real world that happen as a result that you can't just say, look, this is an illusion, right?
Yeah.
Like it's an illusion that I don't have $300,000 in my bank account. If I believe hard enough that my reality is that I have that much money in my bank account, I can go withdraw it. And the teller can't tell me otherwise because it's just an illusion. Just give me the money.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
You can even go, I could even ask you, say, hey, I want you to give me all your money because I want to take that away from you because it's just an illusion. You don't need to worry about it.
Yeah. And then I'd say, you don't need to worry about my money either. Because it's just an illusion. Yeah.
It doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work. So when you get to livable, so if you think all of the material universe is an illusion, why do Hindus eat food?
Why do they? That's a great question.
It's such a crazy idea.
Food? Yeah.
You're eating an illusion that's not real.
Yeah.
And yet you have to do it. But if it's not real, why do you have to? So like you've got a contradictory lifestyle. That's where it's not livable. Yeah. So you can say, oh, this is all an illusion because we're, at one with Brahman. And okay, but you eat food. So you're contradicting in your lifestyle what you believe. So it's not livable. Your beliefs don't work in the real world. You look both ways when you cross the street.
Yeah.
When you're in Bangkok,
there you
because
go.
there's all these cars and all these motorcycles passing, and you think that the material world exists at that point.
You do, of course.
But you don't believe that it exists. So there's just a contradictory lifestyle. It's not
you're
livable.
living out your life as though there actually is things. There are things around you that are reality that you have to live out. Like right now, like I'm sitting in a chair. When I came in this room, I went and I bent over to sit down in this chair, assuming that this chair is a part of reality.
Yeah.
Not that I would sit down and the chair's an illusion. There's not a chair there. I don't know. Sure. I could fall down if I sit down, but no, because that's a contradiction because you're trusting that there's something real. Yeah. That it's not an illusion.
You know what's crazy to me is so many Hindus, and I don't know if they're all strict Hindus and they believe it.
Sure.
But if you think about it, and your wife's a nurse, how many surgeons does she work with that are from India who are Hindus? Tons.
Yeah, I was going to say.
They're literally working in the medical profession with the material world and the body for it to function right. And yet in their religion, they believe it's all an illusion, but they don't.
That's what it is, yeah.
It's such a contradictory lifestyle. So a good worldview needs to be logical. It needs to be factual, but it has got to be livable. And I think that pointing out to people how their worldview is not livable is the best way to help them start thinking about and assessing what's true.
Yeah.
So exactly. A good example of this happening, Francis Schaeffer gives an example of this. A really cool meeting, and basically this is about morality and exposing how a guy's beliefs about morality aren't something that are livable.
Yeah, right.
And so Francis Schaeffer wrote about this. He met a student at Cambridge University, and there was this student who was a young Hindu man, and he was suggesting that all is one in the universe, which is the Hinduistic belief. So Francis Schaeffer thought, okay, I'm going to step inside his worldview for a second, and we'll give it a test run. So he steps inside the Hindu story, and Francis Schaeffer asked this Hindu man, am I not correct in saying that on the basis of your system, cruelty and non-cruelty are ultimately equal, and that there's no intrinsic difference between them? So the man agreed, right? And so this is a belief, is that there's no right or wrong.
Exactly.
Because everything's an illusion, right? So the guy said, yeah, you've got it right. That's what we believe. So once the man admitted this, Francis Schaeffer picked up a kettle of boiling water that they were going to make tea with, and he lifted it up above the man's head. And he said, there is no distinction between cruelty and non-cruelty. And then Schaeffer said, when he did this, the Hindu man walked outside and left.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't believe that there's no difference between him not having boiling water poured on him for no reason and him having boiling water poured on him for no reason. You see, it's not a livable worldview.
Yeah.
And so that's where you've got to get into Christianity. Now, this is one thing I think is interesting about Christianity is so many people will call us hypocrites. And basically what they're attacking is your worldview isn't what you're living out.
Sure.
But the problem with that is they don't understand what we believe. Or maybe we've misrepresented it.
Of course.
Because we don't think that we're perfect.
Right.
And we don't think that we actually can be before Christ resurrects our bodies. Right? Mm-hmm. So what we're saying is we don't match up to the standard and we need Jesus' grace.
You got to understand, that's the biggest thing with that. I've heard that a lot myself. And it's a matter of, like oftentimes, like our ultimate worldview of what we're supposed to be is not livable. We can't live a perfect life and be like Jesus, right?
Not right now. But it's because of our worldview that a human being is made in God's image, but is broken because of sin.
Exactly.
So it is a livable worldview.
Well, correct. Yeah. Yes. I didn't mean worldview. It's not a livable way to, like, that idea. It's not livable. You can't be perfect without help.
You can't be perfect without God taking care of the sin problem.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. And that's where people don't understand. That's where you have to look into what it is. You have to come to an understanding of the worldview itself.
But that's what they're trying to do when they say Christians are hypocrites. They're attacking the livability of it.
Yes.
They're saying you don't even do what you say you should be doing. And so that's where I think it is strong and powerful when we can help people see and understand that their worldview, their assumptions about life aren't livable. Like the atheist who believes that there's right and wrong, but they don't have a reason for believing it. They don't have anything undergirding right or wrong, right? Like the Hindu. The Hindus just admit there isn't right or wrong, right? And so over the next few weeks, we're going to dig into all of this and be able to assess it. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, and we're so excited about it. We're going to be covering each of the 7 basic questions further in depth with other worldviews over this series that we're going to be getting in with you guys. And then we're going to do exactly what we just talked about in this episode. We're going to assess whether they are logical, factual, and livable. So you guys don't want to miss that. Thank you so much for joining us today on Christ Culture and Coffee. And please, if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to us. But like I said, we are going to continue discussing this in a series. We'll be happy, though, if you have any other questions or needed clarity provided with anything we discussed in this episode, we'll be happy to reach out to you. So thank you so much again for joining us on Christ Culture and Coffee. We will see you guys next week with another episode on Worldview.